And if you didn't get a chance already to go through this kind of getting started page, you may want to do so now. There's several things to look at here. The first portion, which will be pretty brief, we'll be looking at Rhino 3D, and then using our installers for Mirar, and also we'll preview a little bit for Thread. You can download those from the website at any time at mirar.thorntontomasetti.com or at thread.thorntontomasetti.com. However, I've gone ahead and packaged those up all together in one at this Google Drive link that you can find here in the Download Installers section. There's also an open source kind of early prototype project called Spectacles. It may not be open source, sorry, it's public, which you can use as an alternate to kind of process what we're looking at today. It certainly won't have all the kind of bells and whistles and advanced features that Mirar has. It's a very lightweight, simple viewer. If you go to Core SSO, if you haven't already created a Core account, you're going to want to go to this link and sign up, and Hanshan will be approving everyone. When you go to that link, you should see a sign-up page that looks like this, and once you've entered your email address and set up your password, you'll be able to select the applications that you want to have access to. You can go ahead and click all three if you'd like, but the two we're going to be looking at today are Mirar and Thread. So again, you can get to that from this link right here, which is coresso.thorntontomasetti.com/signup. We do have to work on shortening these things, but for right now, that's the link. The sample files that we'll be using today, there's a few of them included in the download to kind of show some different ways you can upload content. We'll primarily be focusing on one of them, but you can download that from the download samples link here. And if you'd like to check out the kind of content we'll be creating today, you can see kind of quick examples of them at this link to the Mirar model. So I'll go ahead and open a new tab. And then also a sample report in Thread, which will show how we can kind of live link the model with more advanced data previewing. So let me go ahead and just jump out real quick and show you what those two look like. So this is the model that we'll be generating today and uploading to Mirar. And here we can see a model from Grasshopper that has data and attributes loaded onto it. It's taking a little while to buffer. And here we can see that same model inside of our platform Thread, which we'll be looking at today, which will allow us to go in and do things like advanced filtering and data manipulation on the model and the data associated with it at the same time. So we'll step into all that in a little bit, but that's basically what we'll be working towards today. The links to this presentation are available in the Slack channel and should have been in the initial emails as well. So you can, of course, go here and get any of this content at any time. What we'll be working on today is we'll be working on extracting model element data. So this is kind of part 3 of a 3-part series we did this week on kind of data extraction and visualization. So if you've participated in the other 2 sessions, this will be a very, very familiar process at the beginning. But then we're going to go through the step of setting materials and layers to each one of our elements in our model so that we can upload it and then filter it on the web application. Once we've kind of gone through that process, which all exists inside of Grasshopper, we're going to compile that model and upload it to Mirar. And then we're going to take that model in the Mirar web application, and we're going to show how you can do data visualization with it. And then we're going to talk about how you can set up kind of the environment of Mirar to maybe suit your preferences a little bit more, and then share a view with external users. Once that's done, we will pull down the CSV, which is basically the data sets that will be associated with the elements in the model that we're seeing in this little preview here. And we're going to upload that to Thread, which is our data visualization platform. Excuse me. And we'll see how we can actually link the Mirar model in real time to Thread so that we can actually filter and have interaction between the 2 applications online. And I do want to mention that both Thread and Mirar are currently free to use, as is Swarm. For the immediate foreseeable future, this will be true, so we encourage everyone to give them a try, particularly after this course, to see if you can use those applications in your everyday workflow. And you can, of course, reach out to us, of course, through email or via the Slack group with any questions about Really quickly, I just wanted to give a quick peek into the definition that we'll be looking at today. So it's broken up into 5 basic chunks here. The first chunk, which we'll be going to in depth to today, is the actual kind of underlying parametric model. And again, if you've been in any one of the workshops this week, it's the same basic model across all 3, so there's continuity there. And then in section 2, we're going to be looking at how to pull out some of the model attributes. So we'll just talk through this really quickly. And then sections 3, 4, and 5 are all about the process of converting that grasshopper model over to a model that Mirar can ultimately use, and then uploading it to the Mirar web application. And if you're interested in learning more, there's a few videos on our YouTube channel. I won't play through the whole thing here, but basically you can see about how to connect Thread to Mirar. You can see some previews on Mirar and Thread as well. And if you're interested in the Spectacles project, which is kind of the more lightweight version of this, you can see a little video here on how that process works. And there's also a link in the beginning of the presentation to try that out. And has a slightly different format than what we'll be covering today, but is meant to be a little more lightweight. And just like every time this week, I have included a little section at the end with some references to some basic Grasshopper principles that are applied inside of these sample files. So if you want to go through the Grasshopper sample files and you're confused about some of the concepts, you can take a quick peek at some of these slides here. Okay, are there any questions before we jump into the tutorial portion? Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Rhino 7 or 6, either one will be fine. And I'm going to open up the sample file for today. Play with some of the sliders in the beginning. You can do things like change the tapering. Zoom out a little bit so you can see it. At the base of the tower, you can modify some of the other properties in the sliders to adjust the tower. We'll also see that unlike any of the other examples this week, if you have attended any of the previous workshops, I've also included a section down here that applies program to the floor plates. We were doing that through several different processes in the previous 2 workshops, but for right now, just kind of manually put it in there so that this is easy to modify and will actually show up in the model then. The area I want to jump over to and kind of begin the tutorial at today is actually looking over at these 2 blocks of code. Zoom out a little bit, which is kind of right before the green portion. And this is where we're taking our model elements and we're beginning to extract data from them. The reason being is what we want to do is we want to be able to upload multiple points of data with every piece of our geometry. So for example, on our floor plates here, every floor plate will get assigned a program, which is coming from this list here. And that gets assigned to this program component here, which is just a string component. Is pulling out the area of each floor plate so that we can explore that data on Thread and Mirar. And then it's also pulling out the floor height. So we're pulling out 3 data points for every one of our floor plates. And for each one of our facade panels that's been generated here, we're pulling out a bunch of data for that as well. So for each one, we're pulling out the panel area by just using an area component. We're checking for planarity for each one of these, and so we're just finding out if it is or isn't planar. We're going in and finding the planarity deviation of each one of these panels, kind of down in the more warped areas down here. And we are creating a data collection for that. And then we're also measuring the tilt angle, whether this thing is facing directly out horizontally or it's tilting up or it's tilting down, which might have to do with cost and the robustness of structure required to hold it up. We're also looking at the panel floor count, so we're finding out how many panels there are per floor. And we're also looking at which floor each one of the panels is on. And all this information will help us organize this model later on if we were to inherit it from a different location. And it's also going to give us a bunch of different data points that we can begin to evaluate in Mirar. And the last thing I'm doing here is I'm just organizing each one of those data points with the associated model element, which I can click on here. So now I have each one of my floor plates flattened into one list. So I have a list containing 41 floor plates. And I can just hover over and confirm that my numbers match for each one. So I had 41 programs. Here I have 41 areas. And here I have 41 floor heights. And then I'm doing the same thing for each one of my panels on the surface itself. And I'm pulling out those data points and lining this up. And this is just kind of helping me organize what might be coming from a whole bunch of different locations inside of my Grasshopper model into kind of one bottleneck area where it's very easy to then merge and assemble that information. And from here, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to move stuff in the sample file out of the way. And we will begin to kind of manually go in and rebuild the next couple steps. Okay. Before we do that, are there any questions about the kind of setup of the file or the way the data is being collected? Okay. So the first thing that we have to do is whenever we make our Mirar model, we're going to go print real quick. We have to convert each one of the elements, which is basically either a mesh, a curve, a surface, or a breadth inside of Grasshopper, into a spectacles model element. And this is the kind of custom version of 3JS that Core Studio uses to underlie all of our web applications that do 3D visualization of geometry. And so as part of that conversion process, we can load additional attributes onto the model that may not be in an existing Grasshopper file, an existing Grasshopper geometry. And those include a material, a layer, but also attributes. Instead of just being a piece of geometry with the built-in kind of Rhino attributes that come with it, we can apply any of those things we want to each one of the pieces of geometry, so long as we coordinate the data with the inputs. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to take all of that data we've extracted and we want to convert that over into a series of attributes. So I'm just going to delete this component. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's being done here. Okay. So I'm going to go to the Core Apps tab. I can find it among all my plugins. There we go. And under the Core Apps, the first thing I want to do here is I want to begin to compile all of these data points into a series of attributes that can then be assigned to each model element. And to do that, I'm going to go to the Spectacles Beta tab here, and I'm going to click on the Create Attributes component, which has this kind of tabulated data icon here. Okay. And when I use the Create Attributes component, it wants two things. It wants a series of names, which are basically, you can think of them as the column titles inside an Excel sheet if every one of our panels was laid out in Excel. Or if you're familiar with kind of web standards, you can consider them the keys and the key value pairs. And if I hover the mouse over there, I see it wants these as a list. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my kind of list of titles. Now, these are arbitrary. They can be anything. I've just chosen to name them floor and panel, so it's easy to see which one is associated with which. But you can name these data points whatever you want. What you have to be careful with is you just have to be careful that each one of the names is unique from another, because otherwise those data points will be combined in certain applications, which is not something you necessarily want. The next thing I have to do is, even though I have each one of my pieces of geometry in a nice flat list here, I now need to assign all three of those data points to one piece of geometry. So to do that, if you're familiar with Grasshopper, what I'm going to do is I'm going to graft the input and then just simplify it for good measure here, which can be done by right-clicking on an input and choosing graft or simplify. And what graft and simplify are doing is graft is converting this list, grab a panel real quick, of all the programs and all the areas. And it's switching over from that being one large list with one branch or one container up top. Oops. It's now going in and putting each one of those data points inside of its own container. So now we can see here that our lobby and our retail are no longer in one big long list, but they've been broken up into these individual containers. And we can see, because we grafted all three of the inputs with the same basic structure, that we're now getting a list of the 3 data points per each one of the floor plates. So if I were to scroll all the way down here, I'll now see that I have 40 or 41 because Grasshopper, most programming starts counting at 0. I'll have my 41st collection down here, contains the office, the floor plate, the program, the floor plate area, and then the floor plate height as well. So now what I have is every one of these branches is directly coordinated with each one of my floor plates. So when I go and plug in the result of that merge into the values for my attributes, what I'm actually doing here is I'm now saying each one of these attributes, the floor plates program, the area, and the height are now associated with this key. So we've created a key value pair collection for each. And the result of that is I'm going to get, coming out of this, 41 core spectacle attribute objects. And each one of these now directly corresponds to the floor plate where the information was extracted from. And the last thing I want to do is, because I have a list coming through here, not a data tree, is I just want to go through and flatten the output A here, which will just convert that over. Sorry, let's just look at that in the panel one more time. It'll convert that over from a series of collections where every single one of these is its own branch, back into a list where I now just have my 41, again, starting counting at 0, attribute objects, which now directly correspond with my floor plate geometry. And if you want to know a little more about those concepts, the kind of basic idea behind flattening graph is documented in several places. The Grasshopper Primer or Grasshopper 101 is a great place to start understanding this. But I've included some basic little diagrams that kind of explain what the difference between grafting and flattening does to some data here. So if you want to know more about that, you'll follow.
I think you might be frozen. Hold on, Dave's internet cut out, everybody, so just give it a second.
Hey everyone, this is Hanshin. So while we're waiting for Dave to get back online, maybe I can talk a little bit about our other Mirar plugins. So I think Dave's intention today was to show how you can upload the 3D model through Rhino and Grasshopper and upload them to Mirar and view the model, and then potentially integrate it with our Thread platform. But I also want to talk a little bit about our other Mirar plugins in other softwares. So maybe I can share my screen for 1 second to show you guys where to find them. So let's see. So if you have our core SSL account, once you log into mirar.thorntontomasetti.com, you can go to your user dropdown and then go to download plugins. So normally this is where you can download your Grasshopper plugin by just clicking on the x64 button. But in case if you also want to try out using Mirar and upload your Revit models, you can download our plugin for Revit 2019 and 2018. And then if you are interested in using it for like Revit 2020 or 2021, just feel free to let us know and we can send you links to download them as well. So I think it might take a little bit longer for Dave to get back on track, but let's just wait for a little bit, and then if you still have trouble with his internet, maybe I'll take over the workshop as well.
Thanks, Anshin. Yeah, sorry everybody, just like give it a few more minutes. I'm talking with Dave right now, and he's doing his best. So, but if you have any questions or there's something particular that you want to know, you can go ahead and ask. We have Ben House here, Director of Application Development, Hanshin, and so if there's anything that you're curious about, go for it.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. My internet cut out. The perils of doing this from home, I guess. Give me 1 second to get a few things set back up again, and we'll continue. Can everyone hear me okay? If someone could just answer in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, good. Hopefully this doesn't happen again. All right. Okay, and if everyone can see the Grasshopper file, we'll start off where we got cut off at.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So now that we have our attributes and we have our geometry, we want to combine those two together into a model. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Core Apps tab, which is now moved. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to combine those together into a model element. And to do that, we first need to convert our geometry here and our floor plate over to a mesh object. And even if it's a BREP, it'll go ahead and be meshed. And Spectacles does sometimes work with surfaces, though I recommend using meshes generally. This component will do that conversion for us. So under the Spectacles tab, I'm going to go down and I'm going to click Create Mesh. And if you look, there's a couple different types here. There's one by face colors, and there's some that allow texture mapping and vertex colors. So depending on the type of data you want to visualize, you have a couple selections here. But more often than not, I'm just starting with creating a basic mesh. So again, that's under the Spectacles tab, Create Mesh. And when I drop that component in, I have a few basic inputs that I can plug in. The first thing it wants is it wants a mesh object. So I'm going to take my floor plates, which are BREPs, and I'm going to plug it in there, and it's going to go ahead and mesh those for me automatically. Now, I could pre-mesh them if I want to control the quality, but for right now, we'll stick with that. The next thing it wants is it wants a mesh material. And so this can be left at default value. However, I think it's useful to go in and create a basic material so you can kind of create some basic colors, at least to distinguish the different elements in your upload. So I'm again going to go to the Spectacles Beta tab, and I'm going to click on Create a Lambert Material. I'm going to drop that in here. And the Lambert material has a few inputs. I'm just going to deal with color, but you can also set the emissivity color if you like, and the opacity as well. And opacity can be pretty useful, and emissivity can as well. If you've ever dealt with 3.js, you know the quality of this is basically WebGL standard. You're not going to get something that looks rendered coming out of this, but you can create a bit of variation in the model itself. So for my color, I'm going to go over to the Params tab in Grasshopper, and I'm going to grab under Inputs just a color swatch here. And I'm going to drop that in. And I'm going to choose a color for my floor plates that's maybe just a light gray. I'll plug that in color. I'm going to plug the output from my mesh material, MM, into the mesh material input on my Create Mesh component. Okay. The next thing that it wants is it wants our attributes. And again, we want to make sure before we plug anything into here that we've flattened the output of our mesh attributes. That's again so that we don't try to combine all 41 of our values with 41 branches, in which case, you know, we basically get one to the power of the other, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead, now that I know it's flattened, and plug my attributes into my mesh attributes. Now, this is really all that I need, the geometry, the material, and the attributes. And in fact, I don't even need attributes to upload to Mirar, but that's kind of the point of what we're doing today. But the last thing I can add here optionally is I can put a layer in. And if I don't put a layer on there, everything's going to go to default, which is fine. But Mirar does support layering concepts. So applying a layer will help us organize our model. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one floor plates. I'm just creating a panel using open quotes with Explorer. And this can be basically just an arbitrary string. So I'm going to plug it in. And the last thing I can do is I can set the loading priority. So if I were doing an extremely large model and I want to control how quickly that uploads, I can use this input. That's kind of out in fringe cases right now. So right now what I've done is I've described my mesh geometry, assigned it in a material, assigned each one of these elements an attributes or a collection of attributes, and I've also assigned it a layer. Great. So I'm going to do the exact same thing down here for my glazing. So I'm going to, let's just create brand new ones. I'm going to go back to my Core Apps tab. I'm going to go to Spectacles Beta, and I'm going to create one more mesh. And this time I'm going to go over and grab my panel surfaces or my glazing. And I'm going to plug those into the model input. The next thing I'm going to plug in is a mesh material. But this time for the glazing, maybe I want something a little bit more reflective. So instead of creating a Lambert material, I'm going to create a fog material. And there's no particular reason why you need to use one or the other. It just has to do with your kind of visual preference. But Fong has a lot more values for the kind of specular color and the specular value, as well as the smoothing of the geometry. So you get a kind of much nicer result. But I'm going to copy and paste this down here, and I'll maybe give myself a, just for kicks, light blue color. Not the prettiest, but it will work. And plug that into my mesh material input. And then I've done the same thing down here that I did up here, where I collected all of my values as individual branches, brought them together and flattened that attribute list. So now I can see that I have 3,255 and 3,255 panels. So I could go ahead and plug that into my attributes here. And I'm just going to go ahead and assign this a layer name as well. So I'll just call this one glazing. Plug that in the layer. Okay, so now I've successfully created my collection of attributes, my materials, and my mesh elements. And so now what I need to do is I need to combine each one of these mesh elements together into a model. And we're going to look at two different ways to do this in today's example. One is to upload them as individual models and then overlay them inside of Mirar. And then we'll come back later and we'll put them together into one model and upload the whole thing all together. So the next thing I need to do is I need to remember where this came from. First off, oh, there it is. I need to go back to the Spectacles beta tab, and I'm going to go to the Create Model component. And what the Create Model component is going to do is it's going to assemble together all of those elements, which in this case are just mesh elements, and together into one model object. So now it identifies it as one model collection. I can also assign a series of views if I want to have some preset cameras here, and I can also assign attributes to the model. So I might want to have some attributes at the model level. In this case, though, we basically just want to create a model out of our assembly of meshes. As I mentioned in the first upload, the first upload, we're going to do this twice. So I'm going to take all of my mesh elements for my glazing and plug them into my model as well. So now I've created a model for my glazing, a model for my floor plates, and a model for my glazing. And now I'm ready to go ahead and combine those together and upload those to Mirar. But to do that, I'm going to need to do one thing on the website first. So I'll just jump up here to show what we're going to be doing, which is what we'll be doing is we'll be accessing our online Mirar model by getting our user that we've created. And we're going to pull down our projects from that model. And then we're going to assign that model and upload it to one of those projects. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is I want to pop over to the web app for Mirar. And I want to make sure, one, that I've been able to log in and sign up. And there's a little quirk with the Mirar web app where sometimes you click it twice, you are logged in, but just the icon doesn't update. And if you haven't logged in already, you'll be taken to a screen like this where you can click on Login and Sign Up. And that'll take you to the login page where you can log into your account. Or if you haven't logged in already, you can go ahead and sign up for a core account here. Once you've signed up, though, you can come to the projects page and you can go in and create a new project, or you could add this to an existing project. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new project by clicking the plus sign up by the projects. And I'm going to go ahead and name this AEC Tech Virtual Sample. Right? And I'm going to copy that name after I save it. And I'm going to see here that I have a blank project that's now been created. If I click on it, it's just going to tell me, currently this project doesn't contain any models. Use the Mirar exporters to upload a model, which is what we're going to do. But I'm going to copy that name, and I'm going to go back into Rhino, and I'm going to create a new panel, and I'm going to paste the name of that project there. And we'll see why in just a second. So now what I want to do that I've created my project on the web app is I want to go in and pull that project down from the online web application so that I can tell Mirar, the Mirar plugin, which project I want to assign the models that I just created to. So the first step into that is I need to actually log in to my user account. So I'm going to click on this little SSO component here, which is the core app login. And I'm going to switch to icon view because I think it looks really big. Okay, and I'm going to see here that I'm already signed in because I was previously signed in. But if I want to sign in again, or if I want to sign in for the first time, what I need to do is I need to double click on the icon portion, or if you're not using icons, on the vertical black bar portion of the components to launch the login panel. Now, a few things to note here. If you don't see the login panel, if nothing happens, there might be a couple reasons. One, you may not have unblocked the zip file before you installed all the plugins, so they might still be blocked. In which case, you probably want to go ahead and unblock the zip file and then just drag in all of those folders into the collection as well. Sorry, into the libraries area. And once you get here and you sign up, unless you're a member of Thornton Tomasetti, an employee, you'll be logging in this right-hand portion. For TT users, we have to log in using our portal. So we'll go ahead and do that. Get my password right. Have a little extra layer of security here. There we go. Okay, and once we've logged in, you should see your email address appear here. Now, occasionally you have to do this twice. It's just a little quirk as part of the plugin that happens, particularly on the first time you upload, sorry, the first time you log in. Before you upload a model, you may have to just double click here and choose show the login form and log in again. Sometimes that might happen, and you'll get kind of a null user exception a little further down the line if you didn't. Are there any questions so far or issues? If you're having trouble with the installs, Hanshin is available on the Slack channel to help you through any of the issues. And I'm not sure if we have a breakout room set up in this particular one. Shannon, do you know, do we set that up?
Yeah, I can set one up. Do you need one?
If anyone needs one, just let us know on chat, and we'll set it up if you're having install issues. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and keep going. Okay, so now that we have our user, we're able to access the properties from our Mirar project. So to do that, I'm going to go to the Mirar beta tab now, because now we're talking specifically about the Mirar application. And I'm going to click on this component here called Get Projects. And what Get Projects is going to do is Get Projects is going to let us plug in our user into the U input here. And it's going to go and grab all the projects that user currently has. So if I were to plug that into a panel, I get this nice little naming here. That basically just lets me know every single one of the projects that I currently have available on Mirar. Now, there's two ways I can get the specific project I'd like. I could use a list item component and just grab it by index. Or if I know the name of my project, I can go ahead and plug that name as a piece of text into the N input, and it'll specifically grab that project. Now, you have to make sure that the capitalization is the same, the spacing is the same, the name needs to be exactly identical, or else it's not going to be able to figure it out. But if I know that name, which the easiest way to do that is just to copy it from the web app as we did before, I now have access to that project. And now that I have access to that project, I can both pull content from it and I can push content to it. So that's what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to upload our model to our Mirar project. So I'm going to click on the Mirar beta tab again one more time. And I'm going to go to the model upload component right here, which is this little box with this little arrow above it. Okay, and this will be the last component in our kind of Mirar upload process. So what I'm going to do here is the first thing that it wants the project. So I'm going to plug in the project that I've gotten from my user. The next thing it needs a name for the particular model. So I'm just going to call this floor plate upload 1. And the next thing it wants is you have the ability to provide an optional description. You don't need to do this, but if you wanted to put more information in here, you can. You can also modify this later on the web app as well. But the last main thing we need is we need the spectacles model. And in this case, we're going to upload a model for just the floor plates to begin with. So I'm just going to plug in my spectacles model from my floor plates over here into my model uploader under the spectacles model input. And now the last thing is there's just a Boolean toggle to go ahead and upload the file. So I'm going to create a button. And if you're new to Grasshopper, that's under params input button. Okay. And it gives me a little notification saying, okay, you've plugged in everything you need to now for the component to work. So model floor plate upload 1 will be created. And I'm going to push the button. And I should see the uploader pop up here. And there it's going through and uploading my model to Mirar. And when it's done, it's going to take me to that newly uploaded model. And there are my floor plates on the web application. And now that I'm seeing them in Mirar, and I can see up here I'm in the correct project, I'm just going to click on one of these floor plates to make sure my attributes came correctly with it. And I can see they did. I have my floor area, my floor height, and my program. Okay. And before we get into the web application, I'm going to go ahead and go back to Grasshopper. And I'm going to copy this last portion one more time. And I'm just going to create a new model here called facade, upload 1. And all I'm going to do is swap out now from my spectacles model from my facade and upload that as well. Now, if I continue to upload with the same name, it's just going to overwrite the existing model. So I could change the numbering or change the name and upload a new model like I just did. Or if I wanted to update the model, I could continue using the same name, and it will overwrite that model. So now we're going to let this go ahead and come in. And you can see that the material on this, our fong material, is a lot shinier than what we get for our kind of floor slabs material here. So in a minute, when we combine the two, we're going to have a pretty good quality. And we're uploading 3,000 model elements, something like that. So it's going to take a second to filter this up, particularly with everything else going on, streaming the video and everything. Okay, just about done. And there's a little bar down at the bottom, progress bar, that lets you know. All right, it's complete. And now if I click on one of those panels, I see all the attributes uploaded for that panel as well, which is good. Now, the last thing I'm going to do before we close out of using Rhino and Grasshopper is I'm going to go ahead and copy this one more time. And I'm going to upload a third model to this project just called combined upload 1. Okay, and for this one, what I'm going to do is instead of creating a separate model for both my floor and my facade, I'm going to upload a third model which just has both combined. And I'm just doing this for preview purposes. There'd be no reason necessarily to do this. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm just going to merge together both my floor plates and my facade elements. And I'm going to plug that into my spectacles model, and I'll go ahead and upload that one as well. Okay, that should go pretty quickly as well. All right, and I won't wait for this one to load because it's going to take a while to load up all the panels again. That's going to do basically the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. Okay, so back in my upload file with just the glazing to begin with, we'll now look at how we can begin to visualize the attributes that we've assigned to the geometry. But before we go there, are there any questions about the upload process or any questions about any part of the Grasshopper process? Great. Okay, so we've uploaded our model successfully, and if you have any issues uploading the model, you can just go to the sample one that was provided in the presentation deck. And we've seen before that I can click on one of my model attributes or one of my model elements and see all of its attributes. But what I can also do now is I can go and click on any one of these attributes, and I can begin to color the model according to that property. So here we're now seeing a range for the panel area that's going between, see here, 7.78 and 8.28 square meters based on the units that we provided. And so now I can see, as I can go through each one of these properties that's shared between all of these elements and click on it, I'm going to get a kind of custom gradients, a custom coloration of each one of the panels based on where it sits in the gradient of values. So here you can see every panel that's completely planar is showing up as blue. And then our yellow panels have the most extreme kind of panel deviation. And so we could click on one of those and kind of see, oof, how bad is that deviation? And the nice thing is, for the current attribute I have selected, I can hover the mouse over that panel and see the value there. So here I can see how bad of a deviation I have in the planarity of that particular panel. And I can also do this with things like Boolean values, which will just toggle between true and false in this case. So here we can see whether it's planar or isn't, highlighted between the two attributes. And if I jumped over to my floor plate and look for a second, I can also use string-based data. So for example, my floor program here can now be colored. And now instead of a smooth gradient, I have a series of steps that reflect the colors for each one of these different attributes. So here we can see amenity is blue, lobby is purple, mechanical is red, office is orange, and retail is yellow. And I can deselect the model element to make sure all of my coloration is true. Okay. So this is kind of the power of the Mirar application, is the ability to go in and begin to toggle and visualize these different elements of the model itself. But one thing we can also do is we can use it as a way to kind of combine and look at different options. So right now, we uploaded the first two models as the floor plates and the glazing separately. But they're still both part of the same project. And if I were to go to the models under the project dropdown here, in fact, I can close the floor plate, I'll now see that both of those have been uploaded here. And I bet if I refresh, assuming it's done, there we go. My combined model is also shown up here. So my combined model has the two elements together automatically. But let's say that I actually wanted to kind of manually swap out different floor plate options or different facade options, but I wanted to keep the other one the same. Well, I can click on one of those models, in this case, the facade model. Whoops. Click on combined. No, maybe it's just already overlaid. Yeah, okay. So I always forget about this. There's an occasional little quirk where it leaves the last model loaded in. Interesting. Which you shouldn't be doing, but that's okay. Okay. So what I can do here is that I actually can go in now, and we're going to switch from our combined model to just our facade model. Here we go. And now what I want to do is I actually want to layer multiple models on top of one another. So to do that, I can go to my viewer settings, and I can choose this option here for overlay models. And when I check that option and save my options here, when I go back to my kind of model options, I'm going to see this little plus sign down here, which now lets me go in and select a second model to overlay. In this case, we'll overlay the floor plates and the facade model on top of each other. So now we have both models in there, and I can turn them on and off. Kind of visualization tool, or I can also go in and kind of change the transparency on each one locally if I want to see the attributes from one or the other a bit more clearly. But also notice that I have some additional options down here under my views, under my options dropdown. And one of those is we were using the color by previously and selecting a piece of geometry to do that. But we can also color by attribute inside of the model options area by clicking on the attributes dropdown and selecting, let's do something like, let's do floor area to color in our model. And we'll see what happens here is because floor area only applies to the floor plates, the facade itself has kind of been ghosted out. So the geometry is still there. It's still visible if we pan around, but it's been made in this kind of light ghosted geometry so we can see the program or the properties that we're interested in. And I could do the same thing by going to something like panel tilt, where now the panels are colored. In this case, I might want to turn the opacity on that back up again. Okay. And now I can see the floor plate has been ghosted out in between. So you have some ability to kind of go in and customize the appearance. The other thing you can do is you could choose a different color palette. For those of us who work with daylighting analysis, everyone kind of associates this with incident solar radiation or daylighting. So we might want to choose another color palette to kind of talk about the tilt angles, or we might find something that kind of better matches with our project's current color scheme. So I can go in here and I can look at a bunch of different options that are kind of pre-built in for different color ranges here. And you want to be careful about the type of color you choose, how legible it is, etc. But I'll just go ahead with something like Metro, where I can now see this new color palette apply. And even if I go in and change, let's just do something like planarity or panel deviation. If I change the data that I'm visualizing, I'm still going to keep that same color palette here. Are there any questions about that? The other thing we can do is we can do clipping on the model itself. So we can turn on the clipping box, and we can either use a plane or we can use the box. And we'll see this kind of lightly ghosted version of the clipping box here, and I can move in the sliders to begin to cut into the model. Now, in the current version of Mirar, we don't do anything like kind of edge cut lines or anything like that at the moment. We're just kind of cutting into the geometry. But if I were to turn off my my color by attribute, I can now see that I'm able to kind of cut into the geometry and maybe get a little bit better understanding of what's going on in the interior of it. And if I ever want to turn that off, I can just uncheck this. Okay. So now what I might want to do is I've kind of uploaded this model, and perhaps I'm trying to go to a presentation with a team, or begin to show to a client, or maybe another member of the project some of what's going on with the project itself, and explain potentially what some of the trade-offs are between different designs, or what's really going on in terms of the geometry itself. So perhaps you want to look at the kind of planar deviation here, and we want to see where are kind of the worst areas, and is this okay for the project itself. So I can go in and I can invite other people to collaborate on the model. And I could do that by going here to the settings. I'm just going to open that in a new tab so that this doesn't refresh. And under the settings, I could go down and I could add additional team members here. So if I wanted to add this to someone from TT, I could add a Hanshin to the project. And I can also set his permissions for edit or admin, whatever we like. And I can save it. And now Hanshin would get an email and would have access to this model. So now he can edit the model, he can upload content to it, he can make additional design changes, and he can also create views. The other way that I can share this model with someone is I can create a custom view and I can share the project that way. But before I do that, what I might want to do is I might want to go in and modify the appearance of the viewer, because maybe I want to change the kind of color scheme or the lighting or something like that to make this a little bit easier for someone else to see. So maybe I'm going to go with a dark background. So I could go here, and again, we're in the viewer settings under visualization. I could change the background color to kind of be a darker palette. Maybe if this is part of a presentation, it's going to match this. I might increase the ambient light or decrease it. We can basically see the kind of glare on the model. So in this case, I'm going to lower it down a little bit, so I'm not getting quite as much washout here. And then I can also turn on the ground plane and potentially give the ground plane a even darker color. Maybe we'll go with black. And if I don't want to see this kind of hard horizon in the background, I can add a little fog, which will just soften that out. So now I kind of have a dark mode view of the model that I can share, which will come in kind of with a little bit more custom lighting, a little bit better appearance. I can also change a few things here. Like I could go in and change the selection color if I don't want it to be yellow. For some reason, like maybe I have a lot of yellow in my project. I want to make it easy to see. I can always click on this color and change that. And I can also choose whether I want to always have the hover tooltip be preset to one property or another. So I can type in the name of the attribute here that I'd like to see. So I have quite a bit of ability to customize. I'm going to save my options. The other thing I can do is if I want to share this view with someone outside of the group, I might want to be able to control what they can and can't do with the view that I'm going to share with them. And I can do that by going to the project viewer options and unchecking some of these. So I can say whether or not they have access to layers, whether or not they have access to the attributes and color by, or if they can use clipping or anything like that. But I'm okay maybe with giving someone all the options here that are currently available. So I'll hit save and then close that viewer. And now what I could do is I can actually save this view with someone else by clicking on the share view little share icon down here. And this will give me a little warning the first time I'm doing this, that in order to share this view, I have to make this project public. That means that anyone who has this particular link will be able to go in and see the model, and depending on the level of accessibility I put on the project itself, they might be able to go in and click on the attributes, for example, and they might be able to change the appearance of the model or things like that. So I do have to be conscious that whenever I go and share a view like this, I am going to need to first make the project public. If I don't want to do that, I just want to share internally, I can of course go back to the project settings here, and I could just add that person directly, so long as they have a core account with access to Mirar. Okay, but let's say I'm fine with making this project public. Again, it's not like you're going to be able to Google this and find it very easily. So I'm going to make the project public. And then I'm just going to click here and copy this hyperlink, and then go to an incognito tab. And I'll now see that I have access, there we go, to this model with the view configuration that I saved. Okay, but let's say I didn't want the clipping box to show up there. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go back into my viewer settings, and I'm going to say, you know what, I don't want to have clipping, I don't want to have measurement. I'll let them have access to different views if they like, but maybe I don't want them to have the ability to change the models. So I'm going to save the options again, and then share that view. And open a new incognito tab. And ladies and gentlemen, we have just found a bug, which is that the clipping plane persists when it shouldn't. So let me see if I can turn that off manually. Because I want to get rid of that. So at a bare minimum, I'm just going to activate it. Plane. Hopefully this is a bug, not just something I'm doing wrong. Strange thing to say, but I hope it's true. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn my, I'm going to turn my clipping plane off again, which hopefully will make it go away. And then I'm going to turn off clipping. Save that option. Okay, it looks like it's still persisting, but that's okay. All right, so that's a bug we'll fix. The clipping plane staying on. But we can see if we copy this. Again, go to our incognito one more time. Just a reminder why it says beta, not final. Here we can go. We still have that clipping plane persisting for some reason, which is something we'll look at. But I now have that model accessible. And if someone goes to the options, I turned off the ability for them to edit the clipping. So they can't do that down here as well. But they can still see the model. They can interact with it, and they can color by the different attributes. and they can change their own color scheme as well. So they can begin to navigate it. We can turn all those options on and off to give them control of those things. The other thing we can do is we can look at different ways to share that model. So if I go to the Manage Views tab, I'll see all the views that I've currently created. And I can do a few things. I can edit them. So we'll call this one an honest name. Click and claim bug 1. And so now when they open it, they'll have a name associated with it. I can copy the link from here, and I can also create a QR code. So if I want to put this, on a printout so that someone can see a 3D model as part of our presentation on the viewer, this app does work on the phone and a tablet as well because it's a web app. I can save that QR code and I can download it, or I can put this in another part of a presentation so that someone watching the presentation can go to the model as well. I can also save this view as the project image. So if I wanted to do that, now if I go back to my projects, I'll see there's my little thumbnail image there. You can see a little bit better in the kind of tiles view. And if I go into that project and I want to get back to those views again, I don't have to create a new view every time. Just like we went and looked at the models, we can go to the Views tab here, and we'll see all the views that are associated with this particular project. And we can go over the tab and see the models that are associated. And then if we uploaded any files, like a PDF or maybe another image that we want to include as part of this project, we could do that as well. And we could also go over to the Settings tab, which is the area we were looking at previously. We can now see that the project is public. We could upload an image for the project. And here's also where we can add users, as we saw earlier, to the project itself. Okay, let's go back to one of our views, which is clicking playing with the bug. Okay, so with the model now uploaded and data visualization available, to me this is nice because I can begin to kind of explore my model and see what's going on and understand how the attributes are distributed within the model, which may take 4 or 5 different clusters of components to do in Grasshopper, or in Revit may not be possible at all. But this may not be all I want to do with this particular model. I might want to be able to go in and maybe filter by just one particular floor plate, one floor program type, or I might want to be able to search by a key term, like look for only mechanical floors or something like that, and see what's associated with it. So I might want to be able to do more with the data than I'm able to do with just the Mirar model. And to do that, I can actually connect my Mirar model with Thread, which is our data exploration platform. And if you were on yesterday's presentation, you've already seen a demo of Thread. So some of this might be a little bit redundant, but we're going to look at some new things you can do in Thread that we did not look at yesterday. The first thing I need for Thread, though, is I need a CSV of data or an Excel sheet data. So there's this little button here in the Mirar viewer I can click that will actually download a CSV of the current data associated with the model elements that are on the screen. If I open that CSV, there we go. I can now see all this information laid out for the whole project. So I can see all of my floor plates here, and then I'll see the data switches when I flip from my floor plates to my glazing, which are still model elements, but since they don't have these attributes, it's just blank. And now for the rest of it going down, I can just see all the different attributes that were saved for my entire model. So I'm basically getting a data dump of my 3D model. Now, beyond using for Thread, this is useful for other applications. You're basically getting quick access to a CSV, just pulling out the tabulated data from a project, which is handy in a lot of other use cases. But with that CSV, I'm going to jump over to the web application Thread. And if you aren't signed into Thread, the first time you go there, you're going to come to this homepage. And you'll just need to go ahead and log in up here, which will take you to the SSO and log you in. And then once you're logged in, and if you're logged in Mirar, it should log you into Thread as well automatically. But you should come to your projects page. And in your projects page, just like in Mirar, we can now go in and we can create a new project for this data that we just dumped out of Mirar. So I'm going to hit this plus sign, and I'm going to do AEC Tech Mirar. Oops, for my name. And I'll just put sample over there so I remember to delete this later from all the clutter. And I could add a good description again if I wanted to, or additional kind of text down here to say more about what this is, but that's optional. And when I create that new project, just like we did in Mirar, I can now click on the card associated with that project, and it'll open. And I'm going to see my data sets here. So this is similar to the way that we worked with models inside of Mirar, where the project itself is going to contain, if you think about it in Excel terms, the project is like the workbook, and each one of the data sets is a spreadsheet or a sheet within that workbook that's going to contain the data and then let you create dashboards and visualize a bunch of things. But the kind of column names are going to be shared across the entire project, which has some advantages. So I'm going to create a new data set here, which is just called Mirar Upload 1. And now this is going to be my first collection of data. So the data I want to retrieve is the data that I just downloaded from Mirar by clicking on the download as CSV. And I want to make sure that I'm pulling this data from the same view that I'm seeing here, because if I filtered out some of the elements or only loaded in the floor plates, only that data will be accessible when Thread and Mirar talk to one another. But if I go back to Thread and I'm ready to upload my data, I'm going to click the little upload button here under Mirar Upload. And then I can either drag and drop, or in this case, I'll browse, and you'll get to see everything that is in my downloads folder. Sorry. Random pictures of my kid, apologize for that. And I'm gonna sort by date just to find the latest one. And there we go. And now what I'm seeing here is if I were to, if I went back and looked at that Excel sheet, I would see this is each one of the column names. And if I look at Grasshopper, I can also see this corresponds to each one of the names that I assigned to the objects here. Let's come all the way through. The other thing it's doing is it's going through and it's taking its best guess at what type of data this is. So the UUID we're seeing here is the element ID that Mirar gives to it. And this is what's going to let Mirar actually talk to Thread in a few minutes. Then we see the kind of things that we set up. So here we have our layers that we assigned. That's a string or text. And then things like floor heights and floor areas, it's been able to go through and figure out, oh, that's a number. So it's going to cast it as a number. So this is kind of the moment where I could go in and change any of these properties and also add little descriptions here like this is from Mirar. And I can hit Save Changes. And then it's going to go through and it's going to upload that data. And it's going to tell me it uploaded 3,296 total entries here. Okay, great. So if I want to see that data, just to make sure it's come through and it kind of matches what I saw in Excel, I can click on the Mirar Upload 1, which is the name I gave to this data set, and click on Entries. And now it's actually just going to show me a kind of tabulated view of all the data that I uploaded. There we go. So I can scroll through and say, oh, everything looks pretty good. I also have the ability that if I know there was a mistake in there, like somehow just one data point was incorrect, I can always click Edit here. And then I can go in and I can change a value from true to false or adjust a panel area if there was a mistake, and then save that data back in. So this is kind of a nice way to go in and edit the data. It's not like Excel where I can go in and just grab a whole range at one time. It kind of works on a data by data point, but it does also limit me to only inputting numbers where numbers are supposed to go or text where text is supposed to go. So it is kind of a handy little tool for that. But my data looks fine, so I'm just going to cancel the edit. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that data and I'd like to both visualize some of the data attributes and create a little dashboard. And I'd also like to connect to my Mirar model so that I can get the two to interact. So I'm going to click on Mirar Upload 1, and I'm going to go to the dashboard here for my project. And because this is the first data set that I've uploaded in first dashboard in this project, I start off with the blank dashboard canvas. And so what I'm going to do is maybe what I would like to do is I'd like to go in and filter by just the floor plates. And then for the floor plates, I want the ability to turn on and off the different program types. So I can look for two different components here under my widgets. Sorry, two different widgets under my widget selection. And widgets are basically the UI elements that you're going to populate your dashboard with. Now, if you're familiar with Microsoft's Power BI or you're familiar with Tableau, it's a very similar concept where you can drag and drop UI elements. This is just a bit more tailored for the AEC community, allowing you to use 3D models and images in conjunction with data. So let's say I want to do the following. I want to have a checkbox selector here. So I'm going to drag it in. And I want to make that checkbox selector for just the, let's say the, where is it? Floor program, okay? And so now I can see this kind of little ghosted preview of how much space that's going to take up. So I'll shrink this down a little bit and just make a little checkbox selector for that set. And I'm going to create another checkbox selector, and we'll try out some other types later on. And this one, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to set this one by layer. And so I can see it's really ghosted here, and I'm sure it doesn't come through in the video, but I can see the floor plate and the glazing coming through there as well. Okay, so now I have two checkbox selectors that are ultimately going to let me filter through my information. So I want to check those against my Mirar model to make sure they're working correctly. So to do that, I can actually bring a Mirar model into my thread dashboard by going down to the Mirar viewer widget and dragging that over here. And I'm going to resize a little. And what I'm going to need to provide is I'm going to need to provide now a link to one of the views in my Mirar model. So if I were to go back to my Mirar model, I can either create a new view from wherever I'd like, or I can go to my views list for the project, and I can just copy the link for my clipping plane bug one view. Again, why things say alpha and beta. And I can paste that link. Oops, sorry. I can click on the settings on any widget, and in this widget's case, it's going to let me go in and paste that link in there, and it's just going to remove everything but the view ID, which just helps me kind of share a little bit better. And I'll hit close, and I'll actually see my Mirar model populating in the background here while we're talking. I can resize that as well. And when I kind of have my first basic little dashboard set up inside of Thread, I'm going to go ahead and save. And I'll just save this as floor plate layer checker. Okay. And it's going to reload the model. And I'll now see that I have a dashboard here that's showing my Mirar model and also the widgets that I just laid out, which are two sets of checkboxes. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go in and I'm going to just say that I don't want to see the glazing in this one. I just want to check the floor plates and make sure they're correct. So now we'll see when I uncheck the glazing, the Mirar model has been updated because the two are directly communicating with one another. I can also pan around. It won't save this particular view, but I could go back in Mirar and save a new view if I liked. And now what I could do is I could go in and I want to see the different programs and where they're distributed. So up in the top here in Thread, I have the ability, oops, let's not do that just yet, to go in and color by a particular attribute. In this case, I want to look at the floor program. So I'm going to click on the floor plate program here, and I'm now going to see a graphic that shows up that matches the color palette I've currently selected. And the legend down here is listing out the programs from the Mirar model. If I want to create my own legend, we'll pop over into our widgets in just a minute to look at that. But what I could do is I could say, well, what is this empty one here? Okay, what that happens to be is all the glazing have empty properties, so we just got a checkbox here that's empty. But if I go in and say, all right, I want to turn off the office floor plates, I can click there and all the office floor plates go away. So now I've filtered down to just one particular set. So if you had a mixed use project that was maybe hotel, office, service departments, a retail component, amenity, ballroom, all these different program types, and you wanted to quickly be able to filter through and highlight different parts of the project, you could do it by going through and using something like a checkbox to do that. So I could turn off the retail floor plate, for example. But maybe what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually create some kind of data visualization on the percentage of area or the number of floors that are occupied by a particular area, in addition to filtering the attributes themselves. But before I do that, are there any kind of questions about this setup and the kind of relationship between Mirar and Thread or anything else? All right, so let's go and add a few more kind of widgets into our dashboard so that we can pull out some more meaningful data. So I want to edit this dashboard, and I'm going to keep the same dashboard name, but I want to modify it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to click the edit button here in my dashboard selection or layout selection here. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to scroll down, and I just want to create a donut chart. And one thing you'll notice with Thread is sometimes as you're dragging things around, you have to reorganize a little bit. But let's say I want to have this donut chart actually go in and reflect the floor program. So we're going to group by the floor plate program. And for this one, maybe I'm going to look at it by the total number of floors that are occupied. So summing by count will give me the total number of times that this particular attribute is called. Okay. And maybe what I want to do is I then want to create a second donut chart, which we'll place down below. We have a little fun with our dragging around of widgets here. Okay. And maybe I'll make these smaller, actually. Should be okay. And for this one, I'm also going to go in and I'm going to cluster by floor program. But this time, I'm going to sum it by the total area of each floor. And the reason I'm going to do that is because one chart will represent how many floors have this particular program applied to it, and that's going to be our sum by count. And then the other one will show us basically the total amount of area, and there may or may not be a disparity between the two. I've actually checked. So we'll go ahead and save this, and we'll overwrite the existing layout. And now here we go. They're very similar to each other. There might be a little bit of difference. But now if I actually hover over one of these programs, I want to see where are all of my offices. When I hover the mouse over, it highlights this data in the 3D model and also in the other associated data areas. So here we can see both of these charts share the office as the data point they're looking at. So that gets highlighted between the two. So if I want to see my mechanical floors, where's my retail, etc., I can kind of go through and scrub the data this way. Okay, so let's do a few other things with this dashboard before we close it out. I'm going to go in and I want to look at the following. Again, just kind of adjusting this. One, under my checkbox selector, I don't actually need to check one of these every time to get rid of the glazing. Maybe I just want the floor plates. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And what I'm going to do, or delete it, is I'm actually going to use a drop-down. So I'm going to scroll down to a drop-down selector. And this time when I'm making this selection, give it just a second to upload or update, I'm going to go in and I'm going to deselect all of my drop-downs except for my, what was it, layer. Here we go. So now instead of checking or unchecking one, I'm just going to select the type that I want to visualize. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a legend. So I'm going to scroll down to legend here, and maybe I don't want to always rely on the one in Mirar. So I'm going to drag a legend component in. And we'll have to do a little organizing of our dashboard after this. But under the legend component, I can see it's a relatively small component here. Oops. But that'll just give us a little legend. I'm going to scale this one up. I guess not. Actually, let's do this. Yeah, our sizing's a little funky here. And the other thing I might want to do is I might just want to get a quick count of how many items have been selected in this particular one. So I'm going to go and search and look for a component called status count, which is just going to tell me X out of X current components have been selected. Oops. Okay. And again, just going to rearrange these a little bit. Trying to think about how to reorganize this best. Let's just do this. Okay, and I'll go ahead and save that view. So, oof, it's an ugly layout. I'm not a fan of that. Okay, so not the prettiest layout. We could definitely work on it a little bit. But now I could go in and filter by just 4 plates. Here we go. And I can still do all by kind of scrubbing and highlighting. And I also have this legend, which I really wouldn't put here, put somewhere else. So not the prettiest layout. But I see it directly reflects the same thing that's being shown inside of Mirar. So with a little work, I could kind of create a much nicer looking layout for this, but this is okay for right now to kind of highlight how I could filter. But let's say that I now want to create a second layout that's just focused on the facade and maybe is allowing us to go in and filter through the facade and look at different aspects of it. So I'm going to go into my layout drop down here, and I'm going to click Add New Layout. And this is going to open up a brand new layout window. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my Mirar view again and bring that in. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter only for glazing. And so to do that, I'm going to get a drop-down selector again, put it up top. In that drop-down selector, I'm just going to select my layer. And I need to tell the Mirar viewer which view. Let's see if I still have that in there. There we go. So I'm just pasting that link back in again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 different component types, or widget types in here. And these 2 widget types are going to allow me to kind of filter and scrub through the data that I'm seeing in my model. And maybe what I want to check is I want to check something like area versus planarity, or I want to check tilt angle versus planarity to kind of figure out if there's really areas that are going to be really expensive or compromised. So I'm going to do one thing, which is to grab a parallel coordinates widget and drag that in. And if you're not familiar with parallel coordinates, what parallel coordinates basically does is for each one of my attributes that I tell to look at, it creates a range or a kind of graph of all the different values and then draws a line that connects for each one of these options where it sits in there. So if I were to go in here and let's just focus only on panels. So I'm going to look at panel deviation. I'm going to look at panel planarity and then panel tilt as 3 different inputs. And then I'm also going to potentially look at, let's say, the panel floor count, so how many panels there are per floor. Okay, and I can kind of see this little ghost of that UI showing up here. The next thing I might want to do is I might want to drill down on one piece of information, which is looking at the relationship between the tilt angle and the planarity of the panel itself. So I'm going to go in and create a scatter plot that looks at those 2 aspects. So we'll look at our planarity deviation in our X direction. And in our Y direction, we're going to look at our tilt angle. And we're going to see if we can find any correlation, which we may not. Okay. And so that's the basic dashboard that I'm going to set up here to scrub through my facade. So I'm going to call this one facade. Okay, and when I save that layout, now what I can do is I want to go ahead and filter out those 4 plates for right now. So under my layer drop down, I'm just going to go to glazing. Okay, and that should filter out the 4 plates. There we go, they've disappeared. And we'll also see that my model has now been colored black to match the different attributes. So maybe I want to go in here and color by, let's do panel deviation. Give it a minute. So now we're seeing that kind of representation of the panel deviation being highlighted here. And now I have the ability to go through and scrub this model in 2 different ways. I can go through and say, you know what, I just want to highlight all of the results that are planar. And so here I could go in and filter all the results that fall under the rule of being planar. I can also say, you know what, I want to look at my outliers, the worst case conditions, the ones that have the most deviation and the highest tilt area, or the highest tilt angle. So I can maybe grab that section, I can see, okay, this is the area where I have the worst case. And maybe I want to expand that to say, let's just see what our worst kind of offenders for panel deviation are. That's where they are within the project itself. And I can see as I begin to grow or move this around, I'm beginning to kind of scrub down through the model. And so I can say, all right, now let's look at the worst tilt angles for the highest and the lowest. And there we go, highlighting in those sections. So I can use my scatter plot here to go in and select areas within the data or any set of data that basically meet a particular intersection of criteria. The other thing I can do is I can use parallel coordinates up here to filter my selection based on maybe trying to find the most optimal area. So for example, if I just want to highlight the areas where the planarity is true, I can highlight this, and similar to kind of scrubbing these regions down here, I can basically now see what's actually fallen within the acceptable tolerance for planarity according to Grasshopper's rules, which looks like there's about up to 0.01 deviation qualified as planar. Okay, so I can kind of highlight that info, and now I'm seeing a relationship not just between the 3D model, but also between the scatter plot down below. I can say, all right, highlight all the areas that aren't planar for me. And maybe what I want to do is I want to begin to understand how many of these that actually is. So to do that, I'm going to go back into my dashboard editor one more time. I'm going to make my drop-down selector a little bit smaller, and I'm going to go and find that results count or status count again, and drop that component in. And save. And now I can see 1,060 of my objects have now been filtered out. And so I can now see how many of those panels are technically falling under the non-planar rule. But now let's say that I'm not really worried about planarity, let's say up to about 0.025. So I just want to see the elements that fall above that. So I can go in and scrub a second column in here, and now filter it down even further. And I can see, okay, now I have 630 out of 3,000 elements that are falling within that criteria. And I also see my kind of my scatter plot down here get updated. By the way, you can also notice if you want to see where any one of these dots is, you can hover the mouse over it and it's going to show you where they are. Okay, so that's not bad. But let's say now I want to basically figure out, these are all of my panels that have exceeded my planarity rule, have fallen into the non-planar area. But I want to see the ones that have the best tilt factors in there. So basically, let's say I'm not worried about anything between a 2-degree tilt in either direction. I could filter it out here and then see, okay, well, all those corner ones are non-planar, but they're not actually tilting too much, which makes kind of sense that they'd be vertical. But if I go in either way of that, either tilting in the upwards direction, which isn't a big deal necessarily, or let's say tilting in a downward direction, where now we're potentially getting into more cost to support a heavier glazing, particularly when it's warped in that case. We can now filter down and see, all right, we're down to about 200 panels that are maybe falling into what we consider to be rough criteria. And we can also see what's been selected down in our scatter plot down below. Okay, so let's say that I have the results here, and I've actually found this to be a useful tool to kind of filter in on the results that work and visualize it. And now I want to share it with someone else so that they can take a look and see what they think about the results and potentially also play with the data. But before I do that, are there any questions? Okay. So I'm just going to show that if I were to go back into that thread report one more time and open up my same model with my same dashboard spot scrubber, and we'll go ahead and let it load. All of my kind of color by and my filtering has reverted. It's gone back to its kind of starting state. And the default layout does this every time, so that you basically start with an unfiltered canvas that you can work from. But maybe I wanted to save that particular configuration because I think it's valuable to look at. So to do that, what I can do is I can take this layout and I can make it part of a report. And what reports are basically a way to save multiple dashboards and potentially multiple different data selections and save the filtering, save the color by, and basically save the exact state that you are looking at it at the time in which you choose to create the report. And so I can make some changes and then save out multiple states and then send someone that, and then they can filter through it. So let's look at how that works. So I'm going to go and say start a new report, and I'm just going to name this report panel filter. Okay, and under panel filtering, what I want to do is I want to start adding some pages to this report. So let's say the first page that I want to add is panels for, let's just say, higher cost panels. Okay, and I could add a description of that if I wanted. But now I'll see that I have one page of one saved in my report. Now, let's say what I want to do is I want to set up a second one, which is basically now just showing as part of the sequence. Let's just look at the panels that are planar and are acceptable. So we'll just do a very simple filter here. We're going to select just the panels that are acceptable, and I'll create a new page called optimal panels. And so we can see, oops. Try that one again. I might have to refresh or something. Not sure. Interesting. But that one had it worked, and I'll have to see why it didn't. Could basically be set up to filter to the state there, where, let's see if we can edit this. Try one more time. For some reason, it's not liking that particular filtering. Interesting. So we'll add that to a bug. Again, alpha up here. Let's try it by saving the scatter plot. There we go. Okay, that one helped. Not sure why, for some reason, that particular configuration on parallel coordinates it wasn't liking. But now if we were to go back into our report, we could go to our first state, which is highlighting just all the problem areas in the panels, and our last one. And if we did run into some quirk like this, where just like I did, I got it to work, another thing you can do is you can go in and edit your report afterwards to maybe remove some of the pages that had a glitch, like those two seem to. So I can do that, sorry, by clicking on the reports under my project. And here's my kind of panel filtering I set up. And I noticed that this configuration, sorry, this page, and this page all had problems. But what I really wanted to see, I click on that, there we go, are these two pages, where I can now go in and highlight and share with someone and say, okay, so these two panels are a problem. Or sorry, this selection of panels is a problem. And then this selection is kind of our optimal set here. And if I want to present that in kind of a full screen mode, I can click on the little full screen button to remove all the UI elements and just let my dashboard kind of take over the whole screen. And also, if I went in to my report view here, I can still cycle between the different pages that have the filters applied. So I could share with someone this report and basically say, the first one is highlighting the panels we're concerned about. What do you think about these? And the second one is actually looking at the amount of panels that are optimal, which is over half of the panels that we're currently visualizing here. So this is a way that you could kind of go in and begin to filter out the information here. And the user can still go in and change things to say, you know what, we could probably consider up till here to be planar. So now we're talking about 2,000 out of the 3,000 being optimal. So the person who views the report still has the ability to interact with and filter the data. They just start for the kind of state at which you saved it at. And the last thing is, if we want to save this with someone who doesn't have a thread account or a core account, similar to Mirar, where we can save a view publicly, we can go to this project and we can also make it public by going to the project settings. And here we're going to see we have a whole bunch of different things we can change, one of which is we can add collaborators, just like we did in Mirar. But if I go to my project settings, I can also make this project open to the public. Now, again, this doesn't mean it's easy to find on Google or anything like that, but anyone now has a link to one of the reports can see information in the report. The other thing is you can change the theme colors if you wanted to match it, kind of like with Mirar, to your preference, either for your presentation or for your company's brand. And if you want to use a kind of custom gradient, you can create your own custom gradient down here to begin with, and that'll fall in place with the default gradient type. And if you want to share a project, let's say for a presentation, and then you want to close it back down again, you can always uncheck this option for is open to the public afterwards. And then you can make that project private again. And that just means anyone who has those links who doesn't have a core account will not be able to see that information after that time period. So you can open the data up and then close it back down again. And the nice thing is not only when someone has the dashboard can they still kind of interact with it. It's not just a static or dead PDF. But after the meeting, if you want to kind of close off access to it, they don't have access to, you know, if you would send them a PDF, they're having access to PDF anymore. You can close down the project, or you can make changes to it on the fly. You can update both your Mirar models and your thread dashboards in real time to kind of make changes or adjustments to the length of a project itself. Okay. But now that I made the project public, if I just wanted to go and share that report, I can just go in and copy this hyperlink to the report itself. And then if I go to an incognito tab and paste it, we'll see here that I'm going into, I'm not logged into I'm not logged into Thread anymore, but I am able to see the data. And once it finishes kind of going through this kind of initial filtering state, for some reason, glazing doesn't seem to be persistent through there. Once that Mirar model finishes loading, there we go. We can see the kind of filtering state being applied to it. And then we go to our next view, which is for our standard panels. There we go. We can see now that the glazing has been filtered just the way we set it up in our initial kind of presentation. Okay, so that's it for today's workshop. Hopefully what you've seen here is the upload process is pretty easy. There's just a few steps involved in Grasshopper to get your model to Mirar. And once you have your model in Mirar, you can pull all those attributes down as a CSV and bring them into Thread. And then pretty quickly set up a few dashboards and start exploring different ways to look at data and 3D model elements side by side. So are there any questions or any comments at this point? Please feel free to ask. Let's see. So we have a question in chat. If you talk about circumstances where you use Calibri and Mirar, is the use of Mirar more about showing model details and Calibri for showing design options? Is it possible to combine both, say use data from Calibri, choose a specific design interactively on Thread, then the widget of Mirar can pull up the information, specifies design like planarity of panels. Yes, the premise that you laid out in the beginning for what the two use cases are is a pretty accurate way to describe it, in that Calibri and Thread is used basically to generate design options or to run through a whole bunch of different parameters. You could use Calibri to create something like this data set where you're kind of maybe going through each panel of a project and pulling out the individual attributes of it and then sending up a little image of it. But yes, Calibri is much more about creating that kind of data set of options and then kind of drilling down through it. Whereas Mirar is most commonly, I'd say, used for pulling up models with a series of loaded attributes, whether from Revit or from Grasshopper, and then starting to filter through those using Thread and look at the different options. I have seen an example before, someone kind of set up experimentally where they uploaded a Mirar model with a whole bunch of options on top of each other or side by side. And actually use the kind of filtering here to go through the different options, but still have the more robust model. The other thing you could do is if you uploaded a couple different Mirar models and you want to do assign them to Calibri runs, you could basically just put hyperlinks to the views in there and then filter through that and link to it. That being said, the only way you could have Mirar upload multiple design options and filter through those options using Thread would be to give every object the attributes that would be filtered whenever you're using your Calibri run. But that would be a very heavy Mirar model. In that case, I would probably look at the example Han Shin posted with using the spectacles viewer, which are those little lightweight kind of JSON versions of Mirar. You're not going to have all this kind of interactivity or interplay that you have with the full Mirar model. But you would still be able to kind of filter down through those options. But you can absolutely try out different hybrids of those and see what works. And to that, again, for everyone, if you want to try this out and give us feedback, we're always looking for those use cases to figure out how you would want to use these 2 platforms or 3 platforms together, including Swarm, to figure out the best way to approach that. Any other questions? It's a great question. Okay. If any other questions pop up in the next couple of minutes, feel free to ask. In the last minute, though, the last 5 minutes, I wanted to go through and just do a blatant plug for another piece of software we have called Swarm. And if you haven't tried Swarm or don't know what Swarm is, Swarm can essentially be summarized as Grasshopper computes done on the web. But in addition to the ability to run Grasshopper computes in the cloud, you also have this marketplace that's available for everyone to use, where you can choose to publish apps, which are basically your Grasshopper definitions, up to the web for other people to use, or just for yourself in your own usage, or within your organization. So here, we'll just peek under the hood for a minute, and we're going to look at some of the custom tools that are available only with Thornton Tomasetti that are kind of in here. And whenever you create one of these definitions, like we can find the one for this workshop. I haven't given it an icon just yet. I haven't made a nice rendering. But the model that we've been using for all 3 days is uploaded to Swarm. So if you wanted to try out actually running and generating this tower without having Grasshopper available to us, we could actually run that Grasshopper definition on the cloud. So what's happening right now is it's loading up the current saved state of the model, which is just going to take a few minutes because I have a lot of these other things open in the background. Maybe I'll go ahead and just try to directly load a saved state. But you're able to not just visualize a static model the way that we've been looking at with Mirar, but you're able to actually generate that model using Grasshopper on the web and return it to the web application itself. So here we'll see we have some of the same features that we had inside of Mirar. But the difference is with Swarm is we can go in and modify the model and create another run of it. So for example, I might change the, let's see, the width at the top here to be 60. And then recompute. And then we'll give it a minute to calculate. There we go. And we'll actually see this model update in a few seconds as we've computed a new solution for the model itself. And so one of the great things about Swarm is it's pretty easy now to take a definition you've created and begin to publish it up to a web app. So here we go. The width of the base has now been increased to 60. So we generated a new model. But I now have the ability to kind of share these with multiple people, either publicly or within my organization. And inside of Rhino, I don't have it open at the moment, but I have the ability to pull this in. Actually, I don't have it on this machine. And run this inside of Rhino out the similar kind of dashboard you're seeing here. Probably show it from the documentation. And actually run Grasshopper definitions without needing Grasshopper on my machine, or actually having to have a user understand how to open up and run a Grasshopper file. So for example, if we go and look at kind of the desktop clients, look at the Rhino client here, you can see just a little preview here kind of showing what this Grasshopper definition would look like inside of Rhino itself. So we have this kind of material design, if you're familiar with Google's web standard kind of dashboard, that lets you just play with sliders and then download geometry, upload geometry, process it, and compute it using Grasshopper definition without the user ever needing to get the Grasshopper. And we currently have under development kind of alpha versions for Revit, which will be released relatively soon, and also for Illustrator, which is out for very early alpha testing and will be out for general alpha testing very soon as well. So you can actually run Grasshopper and interact with geometry in both Revit and inside of Illustrator as well as Rhino without needing Grasshopper or Rhino on your machine, potentially if you're using one of those other applications. And as we've seen, the nice thing about the web clients is that you still have all that kind of functionality that was there inside of Mirar, so we can kind of filter and visualize. But I also have the ability to take one of my models if I'm happy with the results, and I can download that as a Rhino file. So this will take just a second because it's a pretty large file to parse through. But there we go. If I click on this in a few seconds, see which version of Rhino it opens with. I actually can have the 3D version of that model that I've created. The other nice thing I can do is, let's say I've made an option that I'm really happy with, on my phone or on my tablet. I just had an idea, or on my computer in the web app, and I want to bring this back into Rhino whenever I get back to my desk and maybe make some more changes. I can click on the snapshots here, and I can go to my saved states, and kind of like we saw with Thread with filtering dashboards, I can save this as great design idea. And then later on, I could either go back to my save states and load that particular option. Oh, sorry, I forget about this. I always have to refresh to get that to save. Or I could go down to my local version of Swarm in Rhino, and I could pull that option down there. So now if we go to save states, we should see, maybe I forgot to hit save. Yes, I did. So anyway. You'll be able to save that option, then access it again later. So that's one of the nice things about using Swarm within this environment. And now we can see that that 3D model snapshot that I just made from the web, I'm able to pull down into Rhino, and I have just a very basic baked version. There you go, with my 2 layers already assigned, panels, cores, and floor plates maintained across there. So it's a very alpha tool. It's less than a year old at this point, but we're continually working on it and continually working to improve it. And I would encourage everyone to give Swarm a try, as well as trying out Thread and Mirar. And like I said, all of these are alpha and beta. They're very much in development, so we're always looking for feedback, ideas, errors you come across, and bugs. I think we just found 2 today. And just your general input to help improve the products to make your life better as designers. So that's it for the workshop from me. If there's any final questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, the Slack channel will remain open, so you can always engage with us there in any one of the workshops or in the AEC category. And I encourage you to try out some of the future workshops we're going to be having over the next couple of weeks. And please give the web apps and the Grasshopper clients a try and let us know what you think about them. Thank you.